Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Last Friday, September 13th, was Roald Dahl's birthday, and I posted a reading vlog in which I tried to read through as many books by Roald Dahl as I could in one day. So the books that I ended up reading were The Magic Finger, The Giraffe and the Pelly and Me, The Twits, George's Marvelous Medicine, The Witches, and about a third of Matilda, which I'm not going to talk about because I didn't finish it. What I wanted to do was reflect on some of the themes that are from children's literature, are present throughout the body of children's literature, that showed up in Roald Dahl's works, and sort of talk about them. There are a couple key terms that I think we need to just quickly go over, and they are children's lit, education, boyhood, and girlhood. So children's lit describes both a set of texts and an academic discipline, and the name itself is a bit of an oxymoron because children connotes immaturity, literature connotes sophistication of both the text and the reader. Henry James actually said that the literature of children is an industry that isn't to be taken seriously because they are written for folks who haven't yet developed taste. You cannot take children's literature seriously because it's written for people who don't know what good taste is yet. Another scholar, Matthew Grenby, asks if children's lit is maybe the wrong name for it because ultimately a lot of children's literature is about teaching specific gender roles. So if it wouldn't be more appropriate to call this body of literature for young people girls lit and boys lit, because there is a huge divide in this literature, at least in the past. Maybe that is sort of changing now, but in the past it was very much about disciplining bodies in certain ways. So that's something to keep in mind when we think about boyhood and girlhood. The other thing is that it's one of the few genres that is defined by its audience, because the creators, the authors, the publishers, the booksellers, and the buyers of children's literature are not children. These things are created for children and are given to children by adults. So it really sets up a world in which the adult comes first and the child comes second. The child is the passive receiver of these texts. And then other scholars have challenged the idea that this is literature at all because if it's for children, it's popular fiction. And anything within this body of literature for young people that has a higher quality of writing gets turned into a classic, right? Like if you think about The Secret Garden is for children, but because of its quality of writing, it gets labeled a classic, so adults are okay to read it. It's literature then. I guess what we're seeing is anything sub-literary, huge scare quotes around that, anything sub-literary gets dumped into children's literature, and anything literary gets turned into a classic. Children's literature, from like the term to the body of works in it, is a murky, contested state. But I think for the purpose of this video looking at Roald Dahl, we are going to consider the body of works that he has written, children's literature. It is middle grade fiction, if I guess we want to avoid that murkiness. It is in Canadian bookstores marketed at children in the age range of 9 to 12, which seems a little bit old to me based on what I've read, but that's where we place it. One of the big things that comes up in children's literature is education. Kids lit is a sneaky way to educate children. And it was in the 19th century that we really saw education become a theme in children's literature. Books started to be set in schools, and although these books rarely focused on the curriculum that the children were studying, the school setting of these books meant that the young reader got an education on education as an institute. Clark says that, quote, schooling is in part a metaphor for the effect that the book is supposed to have, end quote. And that is from Keywords in Children's Literature on page 73. So what are we educating kids on? For a large part of children's literature, we have been educating kids on gender, how to perform gender. Let's talk about boyhood first, because the majority of the texts that I read by Roald Dahl were about boys. They had a male protagonist. According to Felipe Aries, boys were actually the first specialized children. 16th century Europeans used clothing to differentiate boys from children. For infants and toddlers, gender wasn't really a thing. Kids were dressed the same, and it wasn't until the age of 7 or 8, I believe, that boys participated in something called breeching. They got pants, and then they were boys. The word boy, before it was used to refer to a specific type of child, it was used to refer to adult men of like lower status, so slaves and servants. So it was a demeaning term. Manhood is often defined by the ability to dominate, care for, or exercise power over others, according to Tribunella, again from Keywords in Children's Literature on page 22. Boyhood is a problem. If boyness is attached to low status, boys need to escape this, and that's what we see in a lot of children's literature. Boy presents this problem. It's the incomplete man. So historically, in literature for boys, we have seen this escape narrative. In contrast, we have girlhood. In fiction, we see texts often reinscribing a specific vision of girlhood. Fiction for girls was largely didactic. It was about schools, and it was about the domestic sphere. It was popular at the end of the 18th century, but then really flourished in the 19th century and changed with Anne of Green Gables. And that is because of Anne's interest in higher education, which was not a very girly thing to do, right? In a lot of these narratives for girls, we see the girl as a playful protagonist, but she always has to grow up and take on this conventional female role. So those are some key ideas, some core things I think we need to keep in mind as we think about the works by Roald Dahl. You can't see them. The works by Roald Dahl that I read for this reading vlog. So 4 out of 5 had male protagonists. The female protagonist in The Magic Finger is not in a great place. She is unnamed, and she is really not an active participant in the story. Her actions are a catalyst for the Gregg family and their sons to learn a lesson about empathy for animals. The adult women in the stories are either non-existent or heavily stereotyped. They are whining and fainting and hysterical, or they are evil, like the witches. The idea that women with power, witches are women with power, they are not under the thumb of any male influence. They are outside of patriarchal society. They are outside of stereotypical gender norms. The idea that this power, these women are single and they are powerful, is threatening, and therefore these women are evil. They are evil, infanticidal monsters. And these are one of the few depictions of women with power in the body of works that I read for the reading vlog. The other adult woman that we see who is not a monster is the grandmother in The Witches. And she is... she's in an interesting position too, because she is old. And old women are not threatening because they are not sexual, or so society perceives them. The depiction of women in these books is not great. It's very much about a boy going on some narrative journey. Does he go on the traditional journey to manhood, however? I don't think so. I would say that for the most part they are fun and silly and they are nonsensical. Nonsense is a huge part of children's literature. That's another key word that we could get into. Nonsense was frequently associated with the grotesque. Grotesque originally in the 16th century had this meaning of being like unpolished. By the 17th century, grotesque had come to mean distorted, fantastically extravagant, or bizarre. By the 18th century, grotesque also meant ludicrous or absurd. Keeping in mind the history of nonsense with grotesque, a lot of the things that happens in these books are quite nonsensical in that they're dark. Like they... the guns, the violence that I pointed out throughout the vlog, the logic behind certain things. The twits are so over the top, it's grotesque. It's part of this body of nonsense literature, I think. I feel that a lot of nonsense literature isn't necessarily meant to teach. It is meant to entertain. As I'm saying this, I'm working this out on camera with you guys. I am wondering if these are intended to fit in the body of nonsense literature. So they are not intended to educate on gender, but there is a sort of subconscious misogyny baked into these texts just based on the society in which Dahl was living. These were all published between 1966 and 1983? Yeah, oh, look at that, 1983. So we're looking at a 20-year period in which feminism and challenging of gender roles, gender norms existed. Probably wasn't that common. If you are reading this and you internalize that women with power are evil, that is probably not the intended effect. I do really think it's supposed to be a silly, sort of horrific story. I almost wonder if it skews more towards horror for children than like a specifically didactic text, in the way that something like Little Women is very much didactic about the role of women. I think especially with Jo. I deeply enjoyed looking at Roald Dahl's works, looking at reoccurring things, looking at key things in children's literature. I don't think these are intentionally setting out to teach boys and girls how to be boys and girls. And what we see in them is that subconscious societal pressure that bakes in unintentional gendered messages, which is why it is important to think critically about the works that we are reading. It is why it is important when you read something like this with your children, like, yes, it's fun and silly, but it's also maybe important to ask questions about, like, what do you think about the women in this book? What do you think about the boy in this book? And see if you can tease things out, because I think children, especially now that gender identity and sex are being included in early childhood education curriculums, I think it might be interesting to get their take on what they are taking out of these books. I would be super fascinated to teach this to like a grade 5 or 6 class and just see what they get out of it. Before we go, I would like to mention that the Red Rum Book Club is three humans away from its goal of 50 patrons. The Red Rum Book Club is a patron-exclusive book club, which, hard pivot away from children's literature, we are going to be reading the first 6 books in Stephen King's bibliography and discussing them via live show at the end of the month. This is a patron-exclusive book club for patrons at all tiers, so for as little as $1 a month, you can be included in the discussion and included in the live show, and do some critical thinking, some rereading, some getting into this very popular author's body of work, which is massive. Might be fun to do that with a group. So I will leave links to the Patreon page and the Red Rum Book Club in the description box down below. I will link the video in the cards if you want to listen to the whole spiel. And we're 3 people away, guys! We're 3 people away! I'm so excited. Speaking of those patrons of mine, we have to thank my patrons for making videos like this possible. I really appreciate their support and the work that they are enabling me to do. It has been fun to set aside time to do more research, to get back into more academic, critical thinking, discussion videos. This is really where my passion lies on BookTube, and they are enabling me to do this, so thank you, patrons. If you are interested in becoming a patron and supporting the channel in patron perks, like voting on my TBR, links to that will be on the screen and in the description box down below. Do let me know your thoughts on children's literature and Roald Dahl. I do want to get to Matilda, finish Matilda, because I think Matilda is unique in that it does have a powerful female at its center, and I would love to compare and contrast Matilda to the witches at some point in the future, so if you're interested in that, let me know. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have an excellent day, and I will see you again soon. Bye!